Hi, my name's Evelyn, and when I was 9, my parents drove me to my grandfather's house. Said they'd be right back. They never were. 8 years later, they showed up at his funeral, not to grieve, but to steal the $75 million 0 cents he left behind. They smiled in black, lied to the press, tried to erase me from his will like I was a typo. I'd spent years piecing together whispers of their betrayal, but nothing prepared me for the venom in their eyes that day, as if I was the one who'd wronged them. But Grandpa left me one thing they never expected: a pen, a letter, and a verdict that turned their silence into screams. Now tell me, what would you do if the people who abandoned you came back for everything you built? The sun dipped low behind the pines as we drove through Asheville, North Carolina. It was one of those golden August evenings, warm, gentle, with that scent of dry grass and pine needles hanging in the air. I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, hugging my stuffed rabbit to my chest, its ears fraying from love. I wasn't scared. Not exactly, just quiet. The kind of quiet where your stomach tightens and you don't know why, yet. I clutched a crumpled photo of us from my last birthday, their smiles frozen in a lie I was too young to see through. We passed the familiar mailbox that marked Grandpa Walter's property, the faded letters on the side reading Hayes. Gravel crunched under the tires as we pulled into the long driveway. The porch light was already on, casting a warm glow that should have felt comforting, but it didn't. Dad didn't turn off the engine. Mom didn't reach for the door handle. She turned around instead. Her face looked sharper than usual, her lipstick too red, like it had been applied in a rush. She didn't look at me directly. "You're just going to stay here for a little while, okay?" she said, brushing invisible lint from her lap. "We need some time to think." I blinked at her. Think about what? "We just need a break, that's all." Her voice cracked, not with guilt but with the strain of a rehearsed line she'd practiced in the mirror. Dad cleared his throat like he wanted to say something but never did. Mom leaned in, finally meeting my eyes. "Be good for Grandpa. Don't make this harder than it already is." I nodded because that's what I always did. I was 9. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't cry or beg. I didn't think I needed to. I opened the car door and stepped onto the gravel. The dust kicked up against my sandals as I adjusted the straps of my little backpack. The rabbit dangled from one arm. The door slammed shut behind me. I turned around in time to see Mom adjust her sunglasses even though the sun was already setting. Dad muttered something under his breath, shifted into reverse, and the car rolled back. "Wait!" I said, stepping forward. "Wait! They didn't stop!" "Mom! Dad!" I screamed their names until my throat burned, but the car only sped up, leaving a cloud of dust that stung my eyes like their betrayal. I stood there, frozen, watching the taillights flicker, then fade down the road. They didn't look back, not once. The porch light buzzed above me. Then the front door creaked open. Grandpa Walter stood in the doorway, not wearing his usual flannel, but a plain white shirt and suspenders. His face didn't look surprised. "I figured they might do this," he said quietly. His voice carried a weight, as if he'd known their plan long before I was born. I think I didn't answer. He walked down the steps, knelt beside me, and took the rabbit from my hand to brush off the dust. "Come on, let's get you inside." I followed, but I kept glancing back toward the road, hoping the brake lights might flash, hoping they'd realized a mistake. That maybe Mom had forgotten to hug me, that Dad had left his wallet behind. Nothing. Inside, the kitchen smelled like rosemary and chicken stock. A plate sat on the table, set for me. Grandpa sat across from me, quiet. His eyes studied me, not with pity, but with something else. Maybe guilt, maybe rage. I couldn't tell. I took 2 bites of mashed potatoes before pushing my plate away. He didn't ask questions. That night, he showed me to a small bedroom down the hall. The walls were covered in framed fishing photos and antique maps. He didn't tuck me in, but he did leave the hallway light on. "You'll be okay, kid," he said. I curled into the blanket with my rabbit tucked under my chin, whispering into its torn ear. "They'll come back tomorrow, maybe the day after." The hallway light stayed on all night. The next morning, I sat on the porch after breakfast. I waited. Every time tires crunched on gravel, my heart jumped. But it was just Mrs. Clara from across the field walking her old Beagle, then the UPS truck, then no one. The days blurred together. Morning chores, Grandpa's silent coffee, the scent of firewood in the air. Each afternoon, I sat near the front window, waiting. By the end of the week, I stopped asking Grandpa if they'd called. By the end of the month, I stopped expecting them to. That fall, I started school with a new backpack and a new address. Every night I checked the mailbox for a letter that never came, my hope eroding like sand under a tide. And eventually, I stopped checking the driveway every 5 minutes. But I never stopped wondering. Now, 8 years later, I stood at Grandpa Walter's funeral wearing a black dress that pinched at the shoulders. My rabbit, long since retired to a box, stayed home. I didn't bring flowers. I brought silence. The church was packed with townspeople, colleagues, neighbors, and strangers who'd shaken his hand at county meetings. There were picture boards near the altar, fishing trips, 4th of July cookouts, his workshop with the old red toolbox always open. Someone handed me the funeral program. I froze. Under his photo, the name of the granddaughter listed for the reading. Amelia Hart, not Evelyn Hayes. Must be a typo, someone murmured behind me. But I knew it wasn't. It was their first move to erase me, a calculated strike to rewrite my existence before the coffin was even lowered. But I wasn't so sure. Typos don't happen on the front page of a eulogy. Typos don't replace a name that no one ever said out loud after the age of 9. I didn't correct them. I walked to the front, sat in the second pew and stared at the podium like it might catch fire. They'd already started rewriting me. 8 years ago, they left me on a porch and drove away. Now they were erasing me with ink. I stared at the name printed under my grandfather's photo and realized they had already started rewriting me. I didn't blink. The name Amelia Hart still sat bold and centered on the program in my lap, but the sound of the organ had faded now. A hush rolled through the pews like a breath being held right as the doors creaked open again behind us. They walked in like they owned grief. Loretta was in heels too high for gravel and a dress too tailored for mourning. Martin wore a black suit with a silver tie clip I hadn't seen since his sister's wedding 15 years ago. Their faces carefully curated with just the right creases of sorrow. Scanned the room as if choosing which row to ruin. Their eyes locked on me for a split second, and I saw it. A flicker of triumph, as if they'd already won by stepping into this room. They hadn't stepped foot in Asheville for a decade, yet there they were, slowly parading down the center aisle of Grandpa Walter's funeral as if it were a charity gala. I wondered if they'd practiced the entrance in the hotel mirror that morning. Probably did. I gripped the misprinted program tighter, folding the edge again and again until the corner went soft. My heart picked up speed, but my body didn't move. I was stuck back in the driveway at 9 years old, watching the rear lights of their car blur into the dusk. That same chill of disbelief pressed into my spine now, except this time I wasn't clutching a stuffed rabbit. I was clutching rage. They saw me. Of course they did. And they came, anyway. Loretta reached me first, whispering my name like it still belonged to her. "Evelyn, sweetheart, we came as soon as we heard." She placed a hand on my shoulder, light as a feather but as cold as sleet. Her touch felt like a claim, a reminder that she thought she could still control me. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn. I didn't give her the performance she was fishing for. Martin followed, his eyes avoiding mine but nodding to anyone who looked his way. "Walter was a complicated man," he muttered, like reading a line from a script, "but he loved you in his own way." That last bit was sharp. He didn't say "we loved you," just Walter. Singular, past tense, precise. His words were a blade, meant to cut me out of the narrative they were already rewriting. Someone behind us cleared their throat too loudly, on purpose. The pews had turned into a sea of half-curious, half-awkward glances. People remembered the old stories, the girl who stayed, the parents who didn't. But Loretta had already pivoted, like she hadn't just abandoned a daughter for a decade. She tucked her clutch under one arm and eased herself into the pew across the aisle from me. Martin sat beside her. They whispered behind their hands and occasionally dabbed at eyes too dry for tears. The Reverend stepped up to the pulpit, clearing his throat with a kind of practiced weariness. "If anyone close to Walter Hayes would like to say a few words, now's the time." I opened my mouth. I really did. But before a syllable could form, Loretta rose. Rose, like a woman summoned by divine justice, like she was born to stand under stained glass light and hijack eulogies that were never hers to give. She stepped forward, the room tilting toward her with uncomfortable anticipation. "My father wasn't perfect," she began, voice cracking just enough to sound sincere, "but he taught me loyalty." She paused, letting the word hang like a guillotine, knowing it would slice through my... The air left my lungs. Loyalty? She glanced back at the crowd, placing her hand over her heart. He was a man of integrity, stern, yes, but full of conviction. He taught me to always stand by your family no matter what, a lie draped in pearls. He taught me the importance of forgiveness, she continued, pausing for effect. Her eyes flicked to me, daring me to challenge her, to unravel her performance in front of everyone. I may not have been by his side in recent years, but not a day passed that I didn't think of him. Not a day passed. I thought of all the days I'd sat at that kitchen table with Grandpa. Birthdays, science fairs, days I bled on the school track, days I graduated, days I begged for an answer. I never once heard her name. Loretta wiped a tear, or pretended to. The gesture was so practiced, I could almost hear her counting the seconds for maximum effect. "I hope," she hesitated, swallowing, "I hope he knew I loved him, and that he passed on his spirit of grace to those he left behind." There it was, the closing note of her revisionist symphony. A polite clap trickled through the pews. People who didn't know better, people who didn't know me, who didn't know her. I sat stone still because inside me something was cracking. I didn't shout. I didn't leap to my feet, but I wanted to. Oh, I wanted to scream until the stained glass shattered, but then I caught movement to my right. Elliot Kane, Grandpa's lawyer, sat near the aisle, his frame calm, composed. He didn't clap. He didn't blink. He met my eyes and gave a small nod. Wait, that nod said, "Let her finish digging the hole. Let her bury herself in it." And as the applause started, for a woman who hadn't seen her father in a decade, I sat still, plotting every word I'd one day say. My fingers traced the edge of the program, the name Amelia Hart burning under my touch, a reminder that their lies were already unraveling. The church emptied slowly, the way snow melts in early spring, quiet, reluctant. I waited until most of the crowd had trickled out, their conversations blending with the sound of shoes scuffing polished wood and doors closing gently behind them. I didn't speak to anyone, not even Elliot. I just walked. The sky had begun to soften by the time I reached Grandpa's farmhouse. The light over the porch was still broken like it had been for years, flickering once before it gave up completely. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaving the cold on the other side. The house smelled like cedar and coffee, not strong, just present, like the air had absorbed his habits. I stood still for a long second, my fingers still curled around the funeral program with the wrong name on it. Amelia Hart. That wasn't me. That was who they wanted me to be, someone forgettable. I dropped the program on the table, its edges curling like a confession they'd never make. I moved through the hall slowly. The wood creaked in all the familiar spots. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. His boots were still by the back door, lined up neatly as if he might need them after breakfast. The old clock on the wall ticked with a stubborn rhythm, unchanged since I was a girl sneaking cookies from the jar. My feet carried me to the room that used to be mine. He'd kept it clean, not staged like a guest room, but lived in. Books on the shelf, a quilt folded at the edge of the bed, my childhood drawings still pinned above the desk, yellowed now, but untouched. I sat down in the desk chair. The top drawer stuck a little, just like it always had. I jiggled it, and it gave way. There, sitting exactly where I remembered, was the pen, walnut wood, hand-carved, a small inscription near the base. Truth belongs to those who wait. I had waited 2 years ago. He'd handed it to me one morning over pancakes and black coffee. I'd been 15, fuming about a history teacher who docked me points for being argumentative. Grandpa just smiled and slid the pen across the table. "Someday," he said, "you'll use this to settle something people tried to steal." At the time I thought he meant my grades or maybe my confidence. I had no idea he meant everything. That same morning, he grew quiet after a few minutes and stared out the window for so long I thought he'd forgotten he was there. Then he said it. "They tried to have me declared unfit, you know. I remember looking up from my coffee." "Who did?" "Your parents." He didn't sound angry. He sounded steady, the kind of steady that comes from knowing the truth too long. "They brought a doctor, a lawyer, told the court I wasn't managing my accounts, said I was too old, too confused." "Were you?" I asked softly. Not to be cruel, but because I didn't know. He looked at me with eyes that didn't flinch. No, I was angry, and that made them uncomfortable. That was the first time I saw him as something more than just Grandpa. That was when I saw him as a man who'd had to fight quietly for his own name. He didn't go into details, not then. He just reached over, tapped the pen, and said, "That unlocks more than ink." Now, in the quiet of this house, I remembered that sentence like it had been etched into my spine. I turned the pen slowly in my fingers, then looked under the desk. There, nearly flush with the wood, was a small circular notch, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. I pressed the pen's base into the groove. It clicked. The drawer beneath my knee slid out with a gentle creak, revealing a stack of documents, envelopes, a flash drive in a plastic case labeled in thick black marker, "Confidential, Martin and Loretta, 2018. My breath caught. I reached for the top folder. Inside were notarized affidavits, medical records with official seals, a full psychiatric evaluation conducted independently. It read in part, "Subject exhibits full cognitive function, no signs of decline, consistent decision-making capacity, signed and dated 2 months after my parents' attempt to declare him unfit." There were copies of letters, one from a former lawyer of my father's offering alternative strategies to secure financial stewardship over the Hayes portfolio. The language was professional, polished, but dripping with manipulation. I opened another folder. More documents, more layers, each one confirming what Grandpa hadn't been able to say outright. They had tried to take everything from him. Not just the house or the land, but his identity, his legacy, his control over what he built. And they failed because he'd planned for them. I stared at the flash drive. I clutched the drive, my pulse pounding, knowing it held the key to exposing their greed in a way no court could ignore. What secrets does this flash drive hold? Will Evelyn uncover the full extent of her parents' betrayal? Don't miss the thrilling conclusion in episode 2, where the truth unfolds and justice is served. Stay tuned.